So, depending on how you've been following DD2, you may know what I'm about to say, but you may not. But I'm going to pretend that you have no idea what's going on. So, over the last 6 months or so, or however many months it is, they've been switching the rest of the heroes that are on the old path system into the new path system. So the old path system means like what old alchemist was, which was just the path itself has piercing, has blight piercing, but it has like minus health in return. So it's kind of just like stat boosts. So things like that. They're just kind of like, you know, relatively straightforward, kind of boring, but it made sense when the game first came out to kind of have paths just to differentiate them a little bit, just kind of give them like stat boosts. The new path system is basically abilities themselves are different based on the path. So Orphan Ransack is different from Survivor Ransack. Sometimes these are just small changes. Sometimes these are kind of big changes. Obviously, not every skill is changed for every path, but basically, skills are different, can be very different sometimes, and paths and characters in general can be very different based on the path that they are. So a few months ago, they went through Occultist, Runaway, Plague Doctor. So those are all updated now. And then the most recent ones that we got were Hellion and Leper. They came out in experimental like a month ago or something like that. I've been playing them basically every day since, and getting a feel of these new paths, like how they're different than the old paths, how they're better, how they're worse. And they are on live now. So the purpose of this video is for me to break down basically the old version of the paths versus the new version of the paths. How is old Ravager different from new Ravager? How does that change the way that you play her or the way that you can play her? Same way with Leper. So again, I've been playing these basically every day since they come out. So I have a lot of experience, so I can kind of talk about basically some of the changes and break them down and kind of show them off and kind of give my opinion. So if you don't know who I am, I stream every day, twitch.tv/MarinerHawk. I have like just under 4,000 hours in DD2, so I have quite a bit of hours. And I have my opinions basically on these paths, so I'll show you. I'm just going to break them down kind of fundamentally how the abilities are different, and then talk about kind of my opinions and tips if you decide that you want to play them. I also made this guide right here. So this is tinyurl.com/Hellion Leper, which is in the description. I also made one for Runaway Occultist Plague Doctor. So if you have not played those reworks yet, tinyurl.com/steadfastdd2, also in the description. You can check that out. The purpose of this guide basically is to show the old version of the path to the new version of the path. So let's say like Ravager, the old passive, Ravager passive, the new Ravager passive. The actual in-game allows you to compare like Wanderer to Ravager, but this guide is essentially made for people who play the old Ravager and want to know, you know, if that was their favorite path. They want to know how the old or the new Ravager is different, and how the skills kind of look side to side. I also at the bottom here, I get into how the path plays differently, some tips to run it. I give a team comp that you can run if you would like to. Also, if you would like to get an idea of how to run, kind of basically how to test these paths out. Basically all my thoughts kind of on the path in general, some opinions and some tips, things like that. So again, everything you need in the description, my Twitch channel, both of my guides, anything that you would want. This video is basically just to go alongside that. You can use that guide instead if you would like, or you could use it in addition to, or you can use it as kind of a reminder if you want to come back after you watch these videos. However you want to learn this information, that's what I'm here for. So we're going to start off with Hellion, starting off with Wanderer. Start off with her path seal right here. The thresholds that she got extra damage used to be 50% and 25%. They buffed it to 66 and 33. Long story short, you're going to get the extra damage on low health a little bit sooner. And it's a little bit safer to play around that if you decide to. 33% damage, you know, puts you at about, or 33% health, sorry, puts you at about 12, I believe, as opposed to 20% puts you at, let's see, what is that? 8? 8, 6, yeah, about 8. So a little bit of a difference, not too bad. So that second line right there, these buffs last until Hellion ends a turn above the health threshold. What that means is basically, if you get regen at the beginning of her turn, it's not going to knock you out of that threshold. Or if she's kind of low and you use a healing salve, you still get an extra turn. As opposed to it checking at the beginning of the turn and then immediately kind of disqualifying you from those buffs. It's not a huge change, and it's not something that you might notice, but it's a nice little quality of life thing. And I think something like this goes a long way, even if you maybe kind of don't feel it, or if you don't notice it all the time. It is kind of nice, though. So, break down all the ability changes. So, Hellion in general, pretty similar. Wanderer's pretty similar. She got... Heroes with specific tokens tend to change a little bit in these reworks. So, like, Occultist has his unchecked power. Vestal has her conviction tokens, and now Hellion has her winded tokens. So they're a little different from path to path, and I'll show you the difference. One thing that they changed with Wanderer is they changed it from percentage damage to flat damage as far as the minus damage dealt that she gets. So it used to be minus 33% per damage, or per winded token, and now it's minus 2. Basically what this means is for the top end of the damage, you would rather lose a little bit of flat damage. And for the lower end, basically this makes it so if you have high winded tokens, some of those things like toe-to-toe, they don't do a ton of damage, could do 0. So it's something to keep in mind, but it is better for the... And it's easier to calculate also, but it's better for the high end of the damage, essentially. The way winded tokens kind of works now is if you look at, like, DD1, or, like, the old path system, basically, winded's purpose was to basically give a little bit of a downside if you use a really powerful ability. And that still exists, but on Hellion reworks in general, there still is... There's basically, you get a lot of winded, and then you do something cool to get rid of them. So you get this, like, kind of ramping effect, and then do whatever it is to get rid of all those winded tokens, and you get some buffs kind of either way. So they're not straight a debuff or straight a downside. Obviously they are. But you can play around them a little more, which makes kind of some for some potentially interesting playstyles. Wicked Hack, Iron Swan are the same. Let's get into the ability changes. Barbaric Yop, basically just a lot of small changes. So it does not give, it will not give 2 week tokens anymore on any of the paths. Weak tokens got buffed a few months ago, so typically things will not have, will not cause 2 weak tokens anymore, typically. So it ignores blind. She gets a strength token per crit. It is still fundamentally the same ability, just with some changes. The one line that I want to point out right there is gain on hit, winded per target. So what that means is, she could get 0 if the target or both targets dodge. She could get 1 if she only hits 1 enemy, so whether it be like a size 2, or she can get 2 if it hits both enemies. If there are 2 enemies in front of her and she hits them both, she can get 2 winded targets. So this is one of the quickest way if you want to get to that 3 target or the 3 winded threshold, and then use one of the big abilities basically to get rid of them, which I'll get into in a minute. This is one of the quicker ways to do that, so something to keep in mind if you want to run it. Toe-to-toe. Toe-to-toe converts winded into taunts. So there's basically, I'll get into, but basically there are 3 ways of getting rid of winded tokens. You kind of just have to decide based on your team comp or your play style, or whichever one you think is better, basically which one that you run. You can run multiple if you would want. I would just be careful about maybe spreading yourself a little too thin, because you don't want to have, like... You still want Hellion to be Hellion, right? So you still want her to do damage. You still want her to sit in the front and be kind of tanky. You're not going to run all 3 of these. You could, in theory, but I would say probably going to spread yourself a little too thin with the winded tokens, in my opinion. But it's up to you. You can play exactly however you want them. So, toe-to-toe converts winded to taunt. So this is a quick way to get rid of winded while also getting kind of an immediate buff with the forward 1 aspect, the immobilize aspect, and then this could give you, you could get 0, 1, 2, or 3 taunts, depending on how you want to go about it. If you want to play her a little more tanky, kind of as Wanderer, or a little more as kind of a damage sponge, that would probably be the best way to do it. Still pretty much the same ability, just keep in mind the converting winded part. So you don't just get you just don't get taunt tokens for free now. Next one is Adrenaline Rush. Still basically the same ability, but a little bit different. You get bonuses basically for the more winded tokens that you get rid of. So instead of this big kind of heal that it was before, it's a smaller heal, but you can get pretty good heals based on the winded token. So you see plus 100% healed per winded token there. And then the buff duration of the gain on hit health, basically, or healing, you get plus 1 turn per winded token removed. So this is a good way to, between this and toe-to-toe, and you'll see Bloodlust, kind of incentivized to, you know, winded tokens, winded tokens, and then do some big, you know, kind of like climax ability to get as much value out of getting rid of those winded tokens as you can. Bleed Out is the same. Don't need to worry about that. Bloodlust got a big change, big buff. So these, you get positive tokens based on how many winded tokens you get rid of, and these stack. So what that means is if you get 3 winded tokens and then use Bloodlust, you will get a speed token, a strength token, and a crit token. That's unmastered, by the way. So that's pretty crazy. And then the execution aspect of it is no longer tied to bleeding ability or bleeding enemies. So you just get that for free. So as you can see, this is definitely the highest ceiling when it comes to Bloodlust. Or when it comes to getting rid of winded tokens, sorry. Pretty crazy. So you kind of just got to decide based on the 3. Maybe you pick 2 if like you want Adrenaline Rush just to have some self-sufficiency to her. But there's incentive for you to play her maybe more aggressive and go Bloodlust and blow up an enemy with that. So to get into the last 3 abilities right here, AoE Breakthrough is back. DD1. It hits 3 targets. Keep in mind it gains 3 winded per target. Or 1 winded per target up to 3. So technically, although technically this is the highest way, you can get 3 winded tokens immediately and then Bloodlust on like round 2, which is pretty crazy. But keep in mind how often you can actually be able to hit 3 targets, because if there's a size 2, that cuts down a target. If one of the enemies has dodge and you miss, that cut down a target. So while it is the quickest way to get 3 winded tokens, there's a lot of fights where maybe you won't get the consistency that you wish out of it, although still a good ability if you want to kind of max that. Revelry got a little bit of a change. So Revelry mastered basically mostly is it removes horror on everybody, so that's nice whether they have the stress or not. So if you're going against Ghoul and the Ghoul howls and you're sick of it, it gets rid of that. And it also heals, mastered heals the allies too. So it's the same as Sergeant Crush. Don't sleep on that. I know it's only 2, but that can go a long way. I mean, it's a free proc of Divine Comfort, right? A free proc of regen to the entire team. That can be nice. Although it does have a longer cooldown now, it is a pretty loaded ability between healing her and healing the allies. So it might take a little getting used to have the 2 cooldown. That's a really loaded ability. That is a very good ability. So definitely don't sleep on that. And then Howling End does a lot of damage, but it is now gated behind having 3 winded tokens. So the idea is basically you would get 3 winded tokens as fast as possible, Howling End, and then do one of those 3 abilities that are highlighted right there, basically to kind of get rid of it. So number 1 kind of decision, at least in my opinion, that you would have to make is, how are you going to get rid of the winded tokens? Like if you were to have like a step-by-step how you want to make your Hellion build. Number 1, how do you want to get rid of the tokens? Is it through toe-to-toe and have it a little more tankier? Do you want it to be Adrenaline Rush and have a little more self-sufficiency? Or do you want to have really aggressive and then have it get Bloodlust? And then your next question is, how do you want to generate those winded tokens? And you can play her like, you know, kind of where she was before. You can play her, you know, something like whatever you want for the 5th, I guess. Something like that if you would want it to, which is relatively kind of how it was before. I think you are a little more incentivized to play into the winded tokens a little bit more. Just because all these 3 abilities, toe-to-toe, Adrenaline Rush, Bloodlust, very effective. I would say it's probably worth kind of like playing into those, at least in my opinion, in my experience, and getting those going. Because you can get some pretty buffs. I mean, gain on hit. I mean, you can full heal yourself in a couple of turns, basically. So that's pretty crazy. And then obviously you set that up with like with Breakthrough if you really wanted to heal, things like that. There's a lot of synergies. So how would you like to get the winded tokens? The quickest way, if I was to like rank them, I guess the number 1 quickest way is Breakthrough. Although the question becomes, how often are you going to actually get 3? 50% of the time, something like that. Maybe not. Maybe a little longer. That will get you 3 winded tokens in 1 turn, in theory. Although in practice, who knows how often that'll actually happen. Yop can give you 2. Potentially can give you 2 per token. So you could do something, or per use. So you could do something like Yop into Bleed Out or Yop into Revelry. And then that'll give you 3. Which would allow you to use Howling End. And then allow you to use Bloodlust after. And then into, you know, whatever it is that you want to do with that. She doesn't have the ability to move backwards with any abilities. So if you want to do something like a breakthrough spam, it's going to need probably have somebody like Highwayman that can move her backwards basically on her own, or Jester, or whatever it may be. If I was playing this, let's see, what would I think? I would probably go aggressive. So I would go something like this, which is weird because it drops Iron Swan, right? But I would probably, depending on the comp, go aggressive. So kind of what I was talking about is Yop, because there's decently often you're gonna hit 2 targets. So something like Yop, and then Bleed Out. If even if Yop only hits 1, Bleed Out for the rest, to get the rest of the winded tokens, and then Howling In into Bloodlust, get rid of those winded tokens, and then go back into whatever. This has a little bit less reach, I guess, maybe than normal. I know it's tough to drop Iron Swan, and it definitely takes some getting used to. But I think this is probably the best way to go about it, as far as like playing a really aggressive, your typical kind of like Hellion, although you can definitely play different ways of going about her. I would say if you like a really aggressive Hellion, there's a couple paths that you can do that. But this would be a pretty decent one, and obviously Carcass is still kind of it's still a tank path. So you can still play that as your tank path if you want. I would say this is a pretty good setup, though. You know, dropping Iron Swan doesn't feel great. Dropping Adrenaline Rush doesn't feel great either. Those are such, at least for me, those are such comfort abilities. And again, you can play, if you want to play it a little bit safer, you absolutely can switch Bloodlust for Adrenaline Rush. I would argue, definitely try to play around Bloodlust. That is such a crazy ability. That is crazy for just efficiency, I guess, of pressing a button. And unfortunately, you can't Bloodlust into Howling End because Howling End requires you to have 3. But keep in mind, this is a lot of damage. Don't sleep on that 10% and 15% crit damage either on Howling End. That's very high for an ability that does this much damage, and it is gated by a cooldown and by the winded tokens. But still, definitely don't sleep on that. That is really strong crit chance. All right, so let's get into Ravager. A good tip for this, and we'll get into this with Leper, but a lot of the discourse about this, as far as in the Discord, from what I've seen and what from people talking in my chat, a lot of the Discord about these Hellion and Leper updates, I would say decide what your opinion is if you're learning these paths. What is your opinion on free actions? And by free actions, I don't mean things like Temptation or Encore. What I mean is, free action is just the term that you're going to see. But basically, how do you feel about an ability that doesn't end the turn? So, if you've been paying attention to the other Steadfast Steward updates, Occultist, Warlock, Chaotic Offering is a good example. So it's an ability that presses the button, it doesn't end the turn. There are some people, basically the argument is, there are some people that are like, you know, it is what it is. Sure, as long as it feels like a good ability. And there are other people that say, it basically requires you, if it's a free action and you get to press it and get some buffs or get whatever, it kind of becomes a must run, and it kind of handcuffs strategy a little bit, where it's like you have to run this ability now. My opinion on that personally, I don't really care too much about the free actions. I get the argument a little bit, but I don't think it's a big deal. Again, we'll see, especially as we get into Leper. You will see maybe why people aren't a big fan of that. I personally, I don't know, maybe it's a little tacky, but at the end of the day, the reason that you can press a button and still have your turn is so these characters feel more fluid and they feel more fun. So it's kind of like, my argument has always been that if they they made it so, you know, this ability no longer gives you or basically if it ends your turn when it otherwise first did, just gonna feel worse to play. It's kind of like, aren't we shooting ourselves in the foot by complaining about this stuff? That's just my opinion. I totally get the argument. You'll see why I bring that up. So let's start off by comparing Ravager to Wanderer. So this is the passive right here. So she still gets 25% damage under 66%, but instead of getting another 25% damage under 33%, she ignores Winded. So Ravager, as we know, was a comfort pick for a lot of people. The free stats that you would get for Ravager were crazy. That is a path that ran over the game for quite a bit. This path now basically is a flat damage arsonist, new arsonist. So what I mean by that is the idea with Ravager is it's a high risk, high reward path, not quite like Intrepid Duelist, but sort of kind of along those same lines, kind of in that same group. Basically, the idea is that you hit yourself to death's door and then bounce off of it by getting a kill. So you'll see what I mean as I get into this. So ignores death door penalties. So what that means is the weak tokens. She does not get a weak token if she hits death's door, and that works for Kingdoms fatigue also. So in Kingdoms you can get up to 20% fatigue, or it maxes out at 20% fatigue. Basically, if you hit death's door, you can get fatigue. You get 10%, I believe it is, and that maxes out at 20%. But she doesn't get that, so that counts in that, so that's kind of nice. On Killing Blow, she gets a 25% heal, which you can't use against corpses. And then the Winded tokens look like that. So, -2 damage dealt, -1 speed, and then on round start, she keeps the self-bleed kind of aspect of the other one, and she gets a bleed per Winded token, which I believe is resistible if I remember correctly. So the path abilities for Ravager are Yop, Adrenaline Rush, Bloodlust, Breakthrough, and Howling End. So she gets bonuses based on being Death's Door, really, is kind of the main one. So I will show you what I mean. So the difference between Ravager there on the left and the Wanderer Yop, which you just went through over the right, is for Ravager, you do not get Winded per hit. So that is something to keep in mind. You do not get Winded per hit. You get 1 Winded whether it hits. Whether it hits 0, 1, 2, you get 1 Winded token no matter what. So it's kind of an anti-dodge ability now. Keep in mind that Ravager Yop does damage also, which ends up kind of playing into the path a little bit. It's nice because it gets rid of block tokens. But it's just basically a slightly different way, a way that works a little bit with the path, slightly different way to get basically Winded tokens and play into kind of like what the path ends up being. The way that I've explained this path is it's a path for psychopaths. Although if you can play this, there are kind of 2 ways to play this, which I'll get into. One of them is basically like Wanderer adjacent, so it's a slightly different Wanderer. Basically a slightly different Wanderer. A Wanderer that gets heals on kills, basically. Or you can play it into like full psychopath, so I'll kind of break into those. So the Adrenaline Rush looks like a lot of changes. It's really not too much. It's just slightly different. She gets bleed res. Her Winded token removed, gets a little bit of regen. The most important part right there is that final line. Equipping the skill grants on entering Death's Door a stealth token and remove dots. So this and a additional part of Bloodlust basically exists because you want to play around low health on Ravager, meaning basically under 50%. So that equipping this skill, it's just a passive. If you just have the skill at all, you get stealth and then it removes dots for having Death's Door. So it's basically a way to, in case you do get that rogue crit kind of out of nowhere, you don't just lose the hero. That's essentially what it is. This is the safer ability, and then Bloodlust is the less safe ability. So let's look at Bloodlust. So Bloodlust converts every Winded token to dodge, and then it damages her 5 damage plus 5 damage per Winded token removed. So it's 5. If you press Bloodlust, it's either 5, 10, 15, or 20 damage based on how many Winded tokens she has. Does not end turns. So that's when I was talking about kind of the free actions. That's what that means. So you press Bloodlust, get to Death's Door, get the bonuses that are on Death's Door, and get a kill in order to bounce off of Death's Door. That's basically the way to play it. So You see, equipping the skill grants execution 3 while on death's door. Again, that's a passive. You don't have to press Bloodlust in order to do that, just for having the skill on the bar. So as you can see, a lot of benefit from being on death's door. This is a way to force yourself onto death's door, basically, and play really aggressive. Obviously, if you do this, you better be damn sure that you can get the kill. You better be damn sure that you get the kill. In case you don't, or you do make a mistake, it converts Winded to dodge, or if you master it, it converts it to dodge plus. So if you're probably using it on either 2 or 3 Winded, and if you do that, that'll give you the dodge or dodge pluses. So it ends up being pretty unlikely that you're gonna die, even if you do kind of like low roll of damage. And then the master version does 7 damage, increased by 7 per Winded. So that means you can do 7, 14, 21, or 28 damage. Obviously, a lot of damage you can do to yourself depending on how you play it. Keep in mind, for what it's worth, some math purposes, she typically has 80% death door resist, at least in confessions. The chance of her getting hit and dying. Let's say you press Bloodlust, you get a dodge, and then she's on death's door and you messed up or you're low rolled or whatever. It's a pretty low chance because it's only a 20% chance of her dying, and then you cut that in half, so it's about a 10%. The chance of her getting hit and dying is about 10%. But keep in mind, there really should be no reason, because of how much control you have, that she ever hits death's door and you don't get a kill out of it. Like, it's not like this button presses itself, right? You're only going to press it if you're damn sure that you can get a kill. So it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of risk to it, but also at the same time, you're choosing when to press the button. As long as you press the button, as long as you press Bloodlust and bounce yourself to death's door in any scenario that makes sense, you're gonna be fine. The other thing about Ravager also, I would say, is you kind of know whether there's a path for you or not. If you really don't like inconsistency with things like Intrepid or Arsonist or Intermezzo even, if you don't like gambling and you don't like playing around that, you're not going to play this path, or you're not going to play it the way that it I don't want to say is meant to be played, but the way it's incentivized to be played. So I would say it's still worth trying, because this path does a shit ton of damage. It really, really does. So I would say it's still trying, but you kind of know, like, your personality-wise, whether you like it or not. It's not as risky as it's not as risky of a path as it seems. So if you're like, nah, I'm not gonna play this, I don't like Intrepid. Intrepid has a lot more inherent risk to it than Berserker does, or sorry, Ravager. I'll get into that when I get into my opinions, but this is the way I say it. This is kind of a fake risky path, to be honest. It's you have so much control that it's almost like it's not a risky path, to be honest. As long as you play it, as long as you understand the path and play it kind of remotely normal, I would say it's at least worth trying out Ravager in this sense. But like I said, if this is not if you're like, man, that 10% chance of dying, even if you screw up, too bad. That's too high. Then that's okay. It's understandable. Breakthrough gives you a lot of damage to the backline. The plus 50% damage when on death's door, so you see extra incentive to bounce yourself to death's door. So if you're using Bloodlust, hit yourself to death's door, you have execution 3 and plus 50% damage on death's door, or on breakthrough. Sorry, that is a lot of damage. Especially to the backline, that is a lot of damage. So again, if you're pressing Bloodlust, you better be damn sure that you can get a kill. Even if you low roll it, you better be damn sure that you can get a kill. But it's probably pretty consistently that you'll be able to, obviously, as long as you're like pressing this on turn 1. So if you do decide to run breakthrough, it's a good way to melt the backline. Revelry is the same. Now, the big climax of the path right here is Howling End. So Howling End, she has to be below 50%, and she gets plus 50% on Death's Door. Notice that there's no cooldown on this. So if she's under 50%, you can spam this. You get a Winded token every time, but it's an 8 to 12 or a 10 to 14 without a cooldown. And yeah, the Winded lowers the damage a little bit, but that's nuts. So whether you want to play around that plus 50% damage on Death's Door or not, that's still really, really strong. So this path kind of in general, the awkwardness, this is going to sound weird. This might be a little more of a Kingdom's Path, a tiny bit more of a Kingdom's Path than Confessions, just because fatigue lowers that awkward health range that you don't want to be in. So with Ravager, the most awkward range you can be in is like 50% to 100%. Because unless you have a lot of winded tokens, you can't bloodlust yourself to Death's Door on command, and you can't Howling End. And fatigue, let's say if she has 20% fatigue, it lowers that top end, so it's actually more likely that she can kind of survive in that that 0 to 50% threshold. It's not a huge deal, but it actually does make a bit of a difference, because you want to be 0 to 50% as much as you can. So that the gain on kill actually can be kind of a negative, because if you get a kill with Howling End, it's probably going to knock you out of the threshold to be able to use it next turn. So as good as this is, when you play it, it's actually kind of a downside, intended downside of playing Ravager, which I think is kind of funny. Because you're like, oh, healing on 25% healing is good, and then you press Howling End, and you can't press it next turn because of that. So, if you want to play it at its glory, if you will, I would say probably, I would say this is what I would run. Because again, you want to, although there's no way to get more than one winded token in a turn, so it's a little bit slower as opposed to Wanderer, where you can break through to get 3, or you can yop to get 2. It's a little slower, but either way, this allows you to, you basically are gonna want to get the winded tokens as early as possible, at least a couple, depending on what health she is. Basically, you want to be able to bounce yourself either to Death's Door, depending on how aggressive you want to be with like the Howling End, or you want to at least get her to the threshold where she can use Howling End. Basically, you're gonna be bouncing around either between Death's Door if you want to play it really aggressive, or at least under 50% so you can use Howling End. So let me talk about what I mean when I talk about it's kind of a fake risky path. You know when people, that people go on like Mount Everest and they're going up with a ton of oxygen and a ton of oxygen. They have Sherpas that are carrying all their stuff, and they might as well be driving a goddamn car up the thing. It's not like it's not risky. It's still obviously risky. Man, it's so much less risky than if you were like a rich person going on Everest with all the finest amenities, or anything like that is a lot different than the poor person bringing their own oxygen and carrying their own stuff. I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but Ravager is kind of like being a rich person climbing Mount Everest. Or you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go camping for a few days, but camping is like you have your own Wi-Fi and your own RV and a generator and heat, and you have like waiters bringing you food. That's kind of what Ravager is like, because the risk is so less than it thinks. Like if I compare it to Intrepid, right? So Intrepid takes more damage. When she dodges, she gets a stack, which means the next hit that she takes more damage. You don't know when that next hit's gonna come. You don't. You don't know when her dodge plus is gonna fail. It might be through a cherub, which increases that damage from 1 to 2, or it might be from Sundering Steel from the Deacon and increases that damage from 20 to 30. Right? You don't know. There's an inherent risk to that, in the sense that you can't control every single aspect. Arsonist, if you know what Arsonist does. Arsonist is the same kind of thing. Like, you can't, she does more damage based on the burn that she has, but you can't really mitigate that burn, right? You can't, it's not like you can get rid of it, because if you get rid of it, you can't do the damage. You can give regen so that it offsets a little bit, but she has 10 burn and you do regen for 2, she's still taking 8 damage per turn, right? Everything is controlled with Ravager. Like I said, it's not like Bloodlust is fucking pressing itself, right? You only know if you were like, okay, the enemy in front of me has, let's say 6 health. My abilities, Howling End, if I get the value on that, Howling End does 8 to 12. that thing, it doesn't have a dodge. It thing's 100% gonna die. There's like no risk in pressing Bloodlust. It's not like you're gonna press Bloodlust, she's gonna explode, right? You're gonna press Bloodlust, you're gonna press Howling In, and she's gonna bounce off of Death's Door, get that 25% heal, and she's fine. Yeah, there's a chance that she could get from 25%. She could get hit from 25%. She could get crit and then 0 and then die, right? Yeah, there's some inherent risk. But there's like so little risk with the path. It's not as risky as it seems. In practice, when you actually play it, it's really for the top end of damage that you get. I mean, again, plus 50% damage on Death's Door. So that means this thing unmastered, if you bounce yourself to Death's Door, is a 12 to 18. And mastered, it's a, what is that, a 15 to 21. Mastered Howling In is 15 to 21 damage if you're on Death's Door. What the hell isn't going to die when you do that? Obviously, boss fights is the answer. But assuming you're not in a boss fight, for other than the small amount of fights that you're going to be where you can't get kills just freely, this path is not as risky as it seems. Now, let me say that is not a criticism of Red Hook in any way, because I think what we've seen with Intrepid and what we've seen with Arsonist is, in my experience talking to people in the community and the Discord and stuff, nobody plays those paths. Not nobody, but you know what I mean. I have to imagine the play rate of those paths are so low because people don't like, in general, in DD2 at least, people don't like, DD2 players don't like risk that they can't control. So if you want people to play a path, it's kind of gotta be like the way that this is. A very controlled, like I said, it's, you're camping in an RV with a generator and warm heat and a Wi-Fi. Like, it's not that scary, and there's some inherent risk in this, yes, but really not that much. The top end of something like Wanderer, as far as damage, a lot higher, but the riskiness is really not that risky. In my experience, no hate to anybody that plays Ravager or anything like that. It is a very effective path, similar to the old Ravager. I would say at least try it. At least try playing this. It's not as scary as it looks. If you would like to, you can switch out. If you would like to go Breakthrough and have that backline damage, you could do that. You can run Breakthrough instead of Howling End. I would not recommend doing anything instead of Howling End. But you can, you know, if you don't want to have 2 winded tokens, you can do that, and then something like that, and then you can use either Breakthrough. You can use Breakthrough basically, or Howling End. Howling End does not move backwards, kind of like Wanderer, where she doesn't have a way to move herself backwards. So keep that in mind. Basically, you would have to have another hero alongside her, or sitting her in rank 2. Which obviously you wouldn't run bleed out then, so there are kind of different ways to play it. Very, very, very strong path. Very strong path. The team comp that I came up with, basically, if you want to test this out, a good team comp would be this right here. I would say, at least for paths, is I would say Ravager, Scourge, Venom Drop, and Sergeant. Although these two, Flagellant and Grave Robber, can be whatever you would want, but that's one that I would try. The reason that is because if you are going to play her around Death's Door, you obviously want to ensure in every situation possible that you press that button, you press the Bloodlust button, is she can get the kill. So you want to give her strength tokens, you want to give her crit tokens. So that would be the purpose of Sergeant, basically. Retribution can give her, because Retribution gives a crit token based on low health, and Ravager is at least going to be, even if it's not her turn, she's still going to be playing around low health. Retribution, really, really good ability in order to basically buff her just a little bit more and have her do a lot more damage, more likely to get kills. It just makes sense with the path, so that's a good one. Venom Drop is just there to add kind of some extra dot, and then Scourge is basically there to kind of heal the team. Another thing that's good with Ravager is guards, because if you're playing around low health, if you want to stay consistently under 50% so that you can Howling End, you want to make sure that she doesn't take that rogue crit, that rogue Sundering Steel or whatever, and pops her to Death's Door. So being able to guard her from the back is really, really effective. You can do kind of a similar thing with Vestal if you'd rather do that. You could guard Hellion and then give her the Consecration of Light, which would give her strength tokens or crit tokens. Similar thing. I just like Sergeant a little bit better in this situation. It allows you, by guarding, it allows Ravager to stay comfortably. Like I said, the main thing that you want to do is you want to stay between 0 and 50% health. Anything more than that, you don't get Howling End, and you are less likely, the higher health that you have, to be able to bounce yourself Death's Door, Bloodlust. So that's kind of the best way to go about it. I hope that makes sense. If you would like to play a less risky version, kind of similar to the old one, although it doesn't do a lot of damage, or it doesn't do damage in the same way, Adrenaline Rush, extremely safe skill to be able to, again, if you want to play around that under 50% and basically just use Ravager as a Wanderer version that gets health on kills, you can absolutely do that. Adrenaline Rush, being able to go to, I know stealth doesn't make a lot of sense lore-wise, but it does make a lot of sense playstyle-wise. Very, very safe. Very low chance that you're going to, if she does get hit to Death's Door and gets rid of dots and gets rid of stealth, very low chance that she's going to die. So you can play her pretty much like she was before. Something like, you know, you could do that if you wanted to, or you could do, you know, like that if you wanted to. Basically, you can play her pretty similar to the old style. You just have to, instead of obviously bouncing yourself to Death's Door, you're really trying to get value out of the spam of Howling End, meaning under 50%. So closer to the 50% than the 0. You're not really trying to get that extra damage on Death's Door, although if you do get hits to Death's Door, you can use it. Ravager, overall, extremely strong path. It just requires a little more setup like it was before, and basically requires you to decide whether you want to play around the Death's Door aspect or not. I think if you play around the Death's Door aspect, like I said, you get so much control, it's almost not really that risky of a path. But you can play her as like Wanderer adjacent also, and that's still an extremely effective way to play her. Okay, so let's get into Berserker. So Berserker is I don't want to say simple, but straightforward path. But I still think it's really, really effective. And it's one of those paths that's Wanderer adjacent, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that is if you're building a team around Hellion, and you're gonna play her Wanderer, and then you're like, you know what, let's get some bleed aspect to it. And you can throw in Berserker with not too much of a change. I really, really like Berserker, again, for being a relatively straightforward path. See, it only switches 4 skills here: Iron Swan, Bleed Out, Breakthrough, and Howling End. But it's really effective at what it tries to do. You know, some of or one of the criticisms of kind of the early Dark Ascension 2 is like there wasn't really ways to get like bleed teams. This is definitely one way to get a bleed team. So look up the path seal first of all. Plus 10% crit when below 66%. Do not sleep on that. That is a ton of crit just to get for free. In some situations with the big damage abilities, it doubles their crit chance. So for being under 66%, which is you're not really in danger of dying with that health, that is really, really good. And then under 33%, she gets +1 bleed duration dealt. She also gets gain on crit, ignores winded for the next turn. The winded tokens look like this. So -2 damage dealt, same as Wanderer, but it's -10% bleed piercing per token. But with the increased crit chance, there's a good chance that you'll at least be able to offset that, if not get a little bit of positive, since a crit is 20% bleed piercing. So very good path. A lot of fun, at least what I think so. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to plug in. So we'll get into the changes. Iron Swan does exactly what you think it does, which it bleeds, but it pulls the enemy one, pulls the rank 4 up one, and it moves her back one. Keep that in mind for the rest of the abilities. You'll see that it kind of plays into the context. And then on crit, on Mastered, she gets a combo token. So Bleed Out is the same, except -2 damage, which she loses on the top end there, which basically just means that crits, mostly means that crits do less damage, but she gets to use it in rank 2. So she gets an increased flexibility. It works better with the path. I know it's a little bit of nerf with the damage buff, or the damage nerf. Sorry, I don't think you'll see a huge difference. And right off the bat, because it's usable in rank 2, you'll see a situation where she's in rank 1, Iron Swans, and then still at least is capable of using Bleed Out. Breakthrough is relatively straightforward, but still really solid. Moves her forward like it normally does, wins her like it normally does, but it bleeds the front 2 targets. So again, you see a situation where you can Iron Swan and then Breakthrough, move her back into rank 1, or more Iron Swan shenanigans, or whatever it is that you'll decide to do with it. So adds a decent amount of bleed, and then Howling End does damage based on their bleed. So Howling End does move her back, like we're used to it. It does not do it on Wanderer or Ravager, but it does do it on Berserker. So it has the base damage right there, that 4 to 8 or 6 to 12 if it's mastered, and 50% of the remaining bleed on the target gets added to the Howling End damage. Howling End can hit every rank also, by the way, which even if like the 6 to 12 especially is pretty good damage range for an ability that can hit every rank. So although you'd probably rather save it because it does have a cooldown of 2, you'd probably rather save it for like a scenario where you're just planting bleed on a target, just to try to get as big damage as you can out of it. But you can use it as a normal ability, which makes it kind of interesting. It makes it different than the other, Backdraft or like, Wanderer Cause of Death kind of thing, or even the old Cause of Death or whatever. Keep in mind, again, plus 10% crit when under 66%. That means it triples the crit chance of unmastered Howling End. It goes from 5% to 15%. That's pretty crazy. And then master version is from 10 to 20. So that's what I mean. That's a 1 in 5 chance, if she's under 66%, that you'll crit with Howling End, which does at mastered Howling End, which does at the very least 18 damage. 18 plus whatever else crit is on there. So as you can imagine, you'll want to have teams where you can really plant bleed onto targets. So if you do get a high priority target, a size 2, pit fighter, obviously a boss or any of the champions and anything like that, you would definitely want to plant as much bleed as you can onto them just to try to get that big Howling End damage. And then if you do get, it does remove the bleed if you do get a crit off of it, just because it'd be pretty crazy to just kind of like mass crit things. So an idea what you can do is you can Iron Swan, you start in rank 1, Iron Swan, move into rank 2, then you can either, you do have access to bleed out from there, or you do have access to breakthrough, and then basically Howling End is your, as you can imagine, your kind of like climax ability where you're really trying to pop enemies. So if we want to go back to what like a skill set would look at, depending on what you feel about Wicked Hack, I would say something like you might need to take Wicked Hack off, to be honest, which lowers on one hand it lowers your like the ranks that you can hit easily, because this is rank locked to 1 to, that's basically what I mean. This is rank locked to 1. This is rank locked to 1, sorry, 1 rank, I mean. Rank 4 locked onto rank 2, but Breakthrough hits 2 and Howling End hits everybody. So this is the skill set that I would say to go with. This, by the way, this is where you get the really, really big Bloodlust value. So basically what I would start with is, if we want to look at this team comp right here, I would start in rank 1, I would Iron Swan just to plant the bleed basically on that rank 4. And then from there, I would either Breakthrough or Bleed Out, basically just depending on the enemy that's there. And then, so you would get a Winded Token from Bleed Out, you would get a Winded Token from Breakthrough, maybe a second Bleed Out, so that would give you 3, and then you can Bloodlust, Howling End. Or you can do, Bleed Out, Breakthrough, Howling End, that gives you 3, and then Bloodlust sets you up for, whatever. Another, depending on the team that you're running, maybe it sets you up for another Iron Swan. Obviously, as you can imagine, strength, crit, speed, you would want to use Howling End with that, but it gives you some options. It's not, it's a relatively fluid kind of way of going about it, because Bleed Out and Breakthrough both wind. You can, if you wanted to go Yop and get the Winded Tokens a little bit quicker to really set up, you could, although I don't really know you would switch out for that. I guess Iron Swan. But I think Iron Swan, with the context that rank 4 obviously are typically going to be less tanky, that you could, it's reasonable to think that you could Iron Swan, use some other ability to add an extra bleed, and then Howling End it on rank 2 or round 2 or round 3, and just pop basic whatever that enemy is. It kind of depends on whatever the high highest priority enemy is, I guess. I guess for that would be the best way of wording about it. The team comp that I wrote down that I think would be good for that is Berserker, Surgeon. You can do whatever you want with Jester, either Wander or Soloist probably, and then like Seraph. Seraph doesn't have to be Seraph, but I wrote down Seraph just to add some tokens right here, give you some extra defensiveness to Surgeon there, some extra offense to Hellion there whenever she's able to dance around, and then some extra bleed to add up with Howling In. So that'd be Berserker, Surgeon, either Wanderer or Soloist, and I would say Seraph, but it can be any path. Because this allows, Plague Doctor allows you to plant bleed onto the ranks 1 or 2. You can do Harvest or Slice Off for ranks 2 and 3 or ranks 2 and 3. And then keep in mind, Cause of Death also on Surgeon doubles bleed. So if you really do have a high priority target, meaning like a boss or something, you can double the bleed and then Howling In for just an absolute ton of damage. I think this is a really, really solid, really, really well-rounded team. In order to try out Berserker, it's leaning into the bleed aspect of Howling In without basically overselling your entire team, like basically making like a terrible team comp that just bleeds a lot. This is a really, really well-rounded team. I think this is a really, really good recommendation in order to try out Berserker. At least try it. Again, it's a relatively straightforward path. Again, you can do it like a Wanderer adjacent sort of thing where it's just you're just like, you know what, I want some extra dot on my team, I want some extra bleed. Instead of playing Wanderer, I'm going to play Hellion and see what I can do with it and kind of plug her in there. And it's nice to have a little, you know, mobility around with the skill set too. But I like Berserker a lot. This is one way to play Berserker. Okay, so another way to play Berserker, if you would like, is basically dancing. You can dance in these middle ranks with somebody. So that would be something like either Bleed Out or Wicked Hack. But basically the idea is you're going to be using Breakthrough. So using Breakthrough, Matt, in the same way that you would use Holy Lance with dancing, which is an option that you could if you've played Crusader. Basically, you're going to be spamming the hell out of Breakthrough. You could run something like Breakthrough, probably if it bleeds, just to have some damage in the third rank right there. You can go Bleed Out, I guess, if you only want to hit, if you're okay with only hitting one rank. I would say something like this. So it would be Breakthrough. You'd be spamming Breakthrough. So the idea is that it would be for what I wrote down for the team is Aspirant Binding Shadows, but you could put Crusader here instead if you have the DLC. If you do not have the DLC, then you can switch this out with Man-at-Arms. Basically, this would be Wanderer Man-at-Arms or Bulwark or whatever, probably Wanderer, or Wanderer Crusader or Templar Crusader or whatever, and basically you would Aspirant Binding Shadows, which moves him forward 1, and then you would go Breakthrough, Binding Shadows, Breakthrough, and do that. And basically, whenever you're ready to use Howling End, it would set up for that. Because Aspirant has Anamnesis, also a bleed that hits all targets. As you can imagine, very, very effective with the character that does damage based on bleeding. So keep in mind that you would have to bleed out if you were in rank 3 and she was able to go and you wanted to do something except Breakthrough. It'd be kind of hard because you're gated out of Breakthrough and Howling End. But I do think it's a really, really solid like move forward one. Vestal back here again, you could go Consecrations and Seraph if you wanted to, or you could go Wander, or you could Confessor, whatever exactly how you want to do it. But I would say I think this is a lot of fun. It allows you to just kind of plant a lot of bleed and damage in the front ranks, and then whenever he gets enough conviction tokens to his tokens, unchecked power tokens, to use Aspirant or use Anamnesis really solid. Shuffles the whole team also, and get some extra damage for Howling End. Or, like I said, you could, if you would like Crusader with Holy Lance better, you could do the same sort of thing. Holy Lance would combo when you master it, so that gives some extra survivability, kind of like to Man-at-Arms right here. But the same idea. The tip for that, I guess I would say, is whoever the fastest hero is, put it in rank 3, because you want your faster hero going more often than not, so they can use their more move forward 1 ability. If a cultist went first here, it'd be kind of awkward, just because you want rank 3 is the most important, so you want whoever that is to be going first, so that they can use their forward 1 ability and kind of play like that. Okay, so let's get into Carcass. So Carcass is a updated version of the path. there's been kind of two sets of reworks, or styles of reworks, I should say, that they've gone through in the past. Where let's say like Ravager Hellion, right? Completely different path than it was before. That's one style, and the other style is what like Ritualist, Venom Drop, Chaplain, Confessor have all gotten in the past. Basically, it's just an updated version. It's still fundamentally the same path. It's still probably 75-80% of the same path. Just kind of some extra tools, some quality of life things added to it. And that's basically what Carcass got. So if you enjoy, there's sort of two styles to play with Carcass. There's one where it really plays into the new version of the path, which is, I guess, long story short, getting Winded tokens and then Howling End and doing damage. Because it has a damage aspect to it, or you can still kind of camp on the Winded tokens and use them for taunts, like you like was possible in like old Carcass, basically. Old Carcass was a really good path. I would not be shocked if it was too popular, because I know it had Carcass had a very passionate percentage of fans, but at the end of the day, it was a meat shield path, but it was a meat shield path that did no damage. Obviously, in practice, that wasn't super true because of bleed out. Bleed out actually did pretty good damage, but that's kind of how it looked. So they added a damage element to it, I'm sure, just to try to get people to sort of play the path a little bit more. But I do still think it's very effective at what it was doing before. For what it's worth, also, I think spam taunt tanks have been slowly kind of being phased out of the game. And you'll see a couple aspects of that with Carcass that has been kind of nerfed. So the 2025 version, unfortunately, can't spam taunts as much as maybe old Carcass was able to do. But I still think it's a really effective path. So starting off, she has 5 path skills. So number 1 right here is Iron Swan. Iron Swan pulls her back one, which you'll see has some synergy here in a minute. And it also pulls the rank 4 pulls them up too. So it's a really strong ability if you decide to play it. It does damage, gives you speed token. She uses the Wanderer version of the Winded tokens, which is -2 damage dealt and -2 speed. So basically, those speed tokens are a way. The speed token is a way to offset the -2, -4, -6 speed that she has, and it has some synergy with the rest of the path. So we'll look at Barbaric Yop. Has a slightly different Yop. Has a longer cooldown than Wanderer, but it does still taunt. So that's good. It does still give 2 taunts. The second weak token is gated behind critting, because like I said, I think spam taunt tanks and weak tokens also, because they got buffed, have been sort of kind of phased out of the game. Or they at least have, basically most things either give 1 week when they used to give 2, or if they do give 2, they have a long cooldown like this Yop. Keep in mind, Barbaric Yop plus 15% crit chance, that's pretty high, especially for something that hits 2 targets. So the chance of applying that second week is really not as rare as you might think. So she gets Winded token per target in the same way that she does Wanderer. So if you want to get Winded tokens very quickly, this is a way to do it, alongside obviously being the bread and butter kind of taunting, but it does have a 2-turn cooldown. It is going to feel kind of weird for anybody that played old Carcass. And I know there's probably at least somebody right now that's like, oh man, I already don't like this. I would argue to give it a try, unless you were really in love with the old Carcass. I think this path is worth a try, and I still think it does a very good job of what it's supposed to do. So if you look at Toe-to-Toe, Toe-to-Toe has, instead of converting Winded to taunts, you get a taunt per Winded. So that's important on Carcass, especially compared to the old Carcass Toe-to-Toe. You would never master it because you would get rid of the Winded tokens, which means that you don't get the blocks. Definitely not what you wanted. So if you look at this now, Toe-to-Toe gives 1 Winded alongside giving you taunt tokens per Winded. And then fortunately, that master version, actually kind of a nice quality of life thing, is it gives you an extra Winded if the target is size 2. So that means, again, because Yop is a Winded per target, if you're going against the size 2, it really slows down your ability to get Winded. So the fact that you can upgrade Toe-to-Toe and it will give you 2 Winded versus size 2 is actually pretty nice. That's actually a nice little quality of life thing. As you see, it doesn't immobilize either, which, if you were doing some stuff where you want to move back with Iron Swan, that would be kind of a downside. So It does have a 2-turn cooldown, unmastered, which can be kind of nasty alongside the 2-turn cooldown of Yop. But Toe-to-Toe is a good mastery, and it does lower the cooldown. So Breakthrough and Howling End are the two abilities that you use for the Winded tokens. So these are what you're setting up for. You can now give Winded tokens to enemies with Breakthrough if you decide to do that. I would say, as a general rule, you're probably either using Breakthrough or Howling End, because they're both kind of like the climax abilities of using your Winded tokens. So you're probably deciding between one of the two, either in general or on basically depending on your team comp. So what it does is it moves her forward one like it normally does on the other paths. It unmastered, it transfers up to 2 Winded tokens to the target, and then mastered, it transfers all Winded to the target. So you can see a scenario where you, let's say, Yop, you hit 2 and then bleed out, so that gives you 3. So you now have -6 speed, so you can Iron Swan to move backwards, and then you can use Breakthrough to apply Winded to the target. Now, again, -2 damage. The enemy AI is obviously not going to know, so it's depending on who you hit and what ability they use, pretty decently common that you'll be able to lower this to 0 damage. Those only last for 2 turns, but it is an interesting way to be able to lower the enemy damage, basically. Obviously, some really, really high damage, it's not going to make a huge difference, but against certain size 2s or like bosses, actually kind of nice. Just basically a different way of you being able to use the Winded tokens if you would like. I think it's interesting. I think it's kind of fun. Is it the most practical in the world? Maybe it's a little bit, I don't want to say a meme. It's not a meme. It has a legit use, but compared to Howling End, oof. I don't know. I don't know how often you're doing it unless you're running a specific team to do it or want to try it out. I think it's at least worth trying. Don't underrate it. Now, Howling End, very strong ability because it does require you to have 3 Winded tokens, but as you can see it's pretty easy to get 3 in 2 turns, whether that be through Yop and then bleed out, or like Toe-to-Toe and then bleed out. Pretty easy to get it kind of quick, but it does normal Howling End damage. So Carcass is a little bit, I don't want to say a damage path, but it has a damage element to it. 8 to 14, I mean, that's a lot of damage. And then obviously 10 to 18, a lot of damage. So she gets access to essentially her own version of Howling End damage. So Carcass, again, don't want to say it's a damage path, but you are incentivized to set up for and use Howling End if you would like. And then if you master it, it converts those block to block plus. So between the 10, let's say the mastered, for example, between 10 to 18 damage and turning her block to block pluses, as you can see, Breakthrough is cool and is fun, but I don't know what scenario, other than you're doing it just to switch things up, I don't know what scenario that you're passing up 10 to 18 damage with and turning a block to block pluses. That is a loaded ass ability, so you kind of sort of have to run that. You kind of have to. It's just so efficient. If you want to, so normal, let's see, normal Carcass would be something along the lines of, I would say probably this, something like that. Normal meaning, I should say, like how it was before. So it lowers, you don't have a ton of damage, although Toe-to-Toe does some damage, bleed out does damage. This is pretty similar to your old your old Carcass. You could switch 1 or 2 things out if you want to go about this. I don't think there's any reason to run Iron Swan if you're not running Breakthrough. That's kind of the only reason that you would want to do that. That's kind of the main idea. But I would say this would be pretty much it. You want to get the Winded tokens as fast as possible. Revelry, especially with the buff Revelry, although again another 2-turn cooldown, some long cooldowns for Carcass, but some really strong abilities. Don't underestimate that healing the entire team for 2 each. That is pretty solid. So you would, basically get the Winded tokens as fast as possible. So whether that be Yacht bleed out or whatever, or Toe-to-Toe bleed out, and then Howling End every time that you have the opportunity to. You can't just spam Howling End because it does remove the Winded tokens in the same way that Breakthrough does. But you can see this kind of like ramp up, get winded, use a big damage ability, kind of fall down, get those winded back. That's kind of the same idea. And if you wanted to go, if you wanted to do the breakthrough, hand out the breakthrough, basically, probably that, I would say, because you would Yop, you would start her in rank 1, you would get the 3 winded tokens, and then Swan, Iron Swan into breakthrough. Although breakthrough only transfers 2 winded, unmastered, so that then you could do turn 1 Yop, turn 2 Iron Swan, turn 3 breakthrough. So you can do kind of like that, give her a little bit of dancing element to it. It depends. Again, I think Howling End is such a crazy ability. I don't know how you don't run that. To be honest, it's a pretty loaded ability. If you do not want to use that Howling End, again, you can just sit and just use toe-to-toe. You can just sit on those winded and, you know, take Howling End off for, like, Wicked Hack. And just sit on the winded and just use it for toe-to-toe. And just do the toe-to-toe and Yop thing. Or sit on the taunts, sorry. And play her like she is. Or like she was before. If you can, look, man, I'll put it this way. If you can turn down the allures of using Howling End, more power to you, because I kind of can't. So, it's a very strong path, though. It's a very strong path because Howling End is very strong, and because of her synergies in general, similar to old Carcass, where you're spamming taunts, is really, really strong. The team comp that I had was, if you want to sit her in the, basically if you want to play her either via Howling End or via as taunt tank, I would say this is a pretty good one. So it'd be Carcass. I said Nightsworn right here, and then Alchemist and Warlock. One of the things with Carcass playing her as a tank, basically, is she's going to take... She's very much a damage sponge. So it allows you to run pretty greedy, like, for the rest of the team. You can... If you don't feel comfortable, like, shadow fading right here, if you don't feel comfortable putting Alchemist in rank 2, although you obviously would, in that situation, lose Battlefield Medicine, but you still have Warlock for healing, and you still have Revelry for healing. So if you don't want to do that, though, you can use Repartee instead, which the Nightsworn Repartee taunts somebody else. So you could use that to taunt Berserker, or sorry, Carcass, and then you could Shadow Fade from there, depending on how you want to, or sorry, Lunge from there, depending on how you exactly want to do it. But I would say this is a pretty good team. It's a very aggressive team. Alchemist, Warlock, and Nightsworn, all very high damage paths. And I think I would argue that Carcass is a good enough tank to basically to take up all the damage, soak up all the damage, and be able to make it so you can be pretty aggressive with the rest of the team comp. Definitely take use that to your advantage, having a really like true tank, and then being able to run kind of some interesting stuff with the rest of the team. If you would like to do kind of like the Iron Swan breakthrough sort of thing, you just need to switch that out with somebody who can be in either rank 1 or rank 2. So that's Flagellant, Crusader, Man-at-Arms, basically kind of one of those 3. And then you would Iron Swan and then be able to break through. You could even do, you know, pretty much anybody. You could go Chaplain if you wanted to. You could go Duelist if you wanted to. Highwayman if you wanted to. Although, be careful about moving her out of rank 1, because you really do want to use Iron Swan or that speed token, because she's either got -4 or -6 speed. Overall, Carcass, I really, really like it. Howling End does a lot of damage, and it's still very effective. Version of the old version of Carcass, just full tanking it. This is pretty much what I expected of Carcass, which was just an update. Give it a couple of things that are nice, like that toe-to-toe, giving extra winded if it hits a size 2, just little quality of life things. Definitely got a lot more damage. It got a lot more effective Howling End than I thought it would get. But honestly, I think it's a nice addition. I know it's kind of weird that damage Carcass, quote unquote, is a thing. I definitely think that's kind of weird, but when you play it, pretty fun. So like, I get it. But even if you don't want to play into that, just go full tank and have your fun. So, final thing for Hellion, let's look at our new trinkets. So, Bloodied Branch, +2 bleed dealt when self HP is below 33% health, or when HP is below 33%, and then +25% damage when self bleed. So basically, this was the Berserker trinket. It still works, obviously, very well with Berserker, but it's also kind of a Ravager, because she gets the bleed, the +25% damage, and she gets the bleed tokens based on bleed based on the winded tokens. I mean, so it really, it's a path that works for everybody. It even works for Carcass. Carcass, you get the bleed out. So it's a really, although it has a similar identity, being obviously the bleeding aspect of it, really, it's still really strong on the other path. So that's kind of nice. It's definitely not as one-dimensional as it was before. So Empty Stein, when stress healed, plus 1% crit for the rest of the battle. Raucous Reveille gives her either a strength token or a daze, which is kind of funny. And then Barbaric Yop lowers their debuff resist for 3 turns. Keep in mind that minus 20% debuff resist for most enemies against unless you're going against a size 2 or a boss, that's going to be all of their debuff resist, or it's going to be very close to 10. So don't underestimate lowering somebody's debuff resist. There's not a ton of ways to do it in this game. And to be able to do it on an ability that, depending on what path you are, I mean, is literally a spammable ability. You can just permanently have them at no debuff resist or close to 0 debuff resist. So very strong if you're spamming Raucous as much as you can, because it has the cooldown that it does now. But still strong when stress heal plus 1% crit. Cool. It's a cool little trinket. Give you some free bonuses, especially if you're using Yop. Very, very good. And Rotten Tomato is plus 2 damage when the target has combo. And if you hit rank 4 while you have this trinket on, it's a weak token. Keep in mind this counts for Berserker Howling End that can hit every rank. Obviously, Iron Swan's on the path. This also works for combat items. So actually, it might be worth giving her a combat item that can't hit rank 4, probably just like an AoE one. Even if it's something like Chalk Dust, like something that like doesn't do any damage, it still adds a weak token to rank 4, which is can be nice if you know that you're gonna tank a big damage from like a pillager or something like that. And then it knocks her back, which is crit, which usually isn't a huge deal, but it does, knocks her back. Might actually be nice to knock her back. All right, so our boy Leper. So I'm going to start off in this document right here because it's just kind of a lot of small stat changes, and it's easier to just show them off right here. So combat start, Leper starts has one blind that checks debuff resist instead of 0-2 that skips debuff resist. That's nice because it feels like you can actually, first of all, you're not going to get bullied by getting that second one, but also, if you do get debuff resist, at least you have some kind of counterplay to it. Is move res got buffed to stun res. His move res got buffed to 30%, stun res got buffed to 40%. As you can see, he got damage buffs across the board. So you see right here, chop plus, and then it's purge, hew, bash, intimidate, break. The new values, basically those little things like intimidate that did 1-2, pathetic little damage, 2-6 now. So damage buffs across the board, which I think will lead. He still has the wide ranges. Like if you look at chop plus, 8-16. Still a very, very wide range. Break, 6-12. But you're not going to get those as pathetic low rolls. You'll never be happy if you low roll a 6 on break because it can go to 12. But at least it's not 4. it does go a long way. So if you would like that, again, that's on the document if you want to look at everything that basically got buffed. So I'm going to get back into my free action debate. So the discourse in the DD2 community, if you will, both in my chat and in the Discord, the first thing that you have to decide on your idea of Leper, or what your opinion is on Leper, is what are your opinion on free actions? And by free actions, I don't mean Encore, I don't mean Temptation. What I mean is when you press a button and it does not end your turn. If you look at that as you don't really care too much about it, that won't bother you. But the argument, that's kind of how I don't think the free action thing is we talked about it on Berserker, because Berserker has it also. I don't think the free action thing is that big of a deal personally, but I get the argument of the other side being that there's some argument that it does an ability that has a free action element to it, meaning you press it and it does something and then allows you to do another thing, is going to be heavily weighted towards an ability that you need to put on your build because it's a disgustingly efficient button press. Because you don't you don't have to go with the counterpoint or the counterweight of losing your turn. I get the argument. There's been some passionate discourse on free actions. My argument is kind of like, personally, my argument is the purpose of a free action is to get you to play around something or play in a certain way. And from a realistic standpoint, I believe that if we as a community complained about free actions, it is more likely from a human aspect, it is more likely, although Red Hook could do something else, it is more likely that instead of they're not Red Hook from a human perspective is not going to rework the entire ability. That's my opinion. It's more likely that they're just going to make it that it's not a free action anymore. And if they make it so it's just not a free action anymore, it's going to be worse for us as far as playing. It's going to be worse for like the smoothness, for the fluidity of playing a path. Because these things, these abilities that we're going to talk about kind of are gated around the fact that they are free abilities. So I think we're really just kind of shooting ourselves in the foot on that. You know, it's a discussion that has been had and will continue to be had, and I don't shy away from debate or anything about it. I totally get it. I don't think that anybody that disagrees with me is dumb. I just don't think it's as big of a deal as maybe the discussions around it have been. And if you're not plugged into the DD2 community, if you're not following every little aspect of it like I am, you don't give a shit. But I want to give the full context anyways. You may like Leper or you may not like Leper, but I believe that these free actions are here to stay. So Chop and Purge are, you know, essentially the same abilities. So the free action thing, number one is Withstand. So on Wanderer, Leper, excuse me. So let me break this down for you. Okay, so that first line there, that's self-block plus. So initially, when you first press the button, when you first press Withstand, it gives you 2 blocks and 2 taunts. That's it. That's what it does immediately when you press it. Now, first of all, let me explain. Withstand and Revenge are kind of like stances. It's not exactly like Duelist because it doesn't change the behavior of abilities the way that you know, Wanderer, Duelist, if you're an aggressive versus defensive, it makes disengage either a push or pull. Right, so it doesn't change the behavior of abilities, but it changes the behavior of Leper the character. So kind of like stances would be the best way to word it. So again, you press Withstand, you get 2 blocks, 2 taunts immediately, and then for the rest of the battle, it says the rest of the battle. Really, just that what that means, the rest of the battle, or until you switch into Revenge, which is the other stance ability. So it lasts until you press Revenge or until the battle ends. So you have that immediate block, 2 block, and 2 taunts. And then for the rest of the battle, or until you switch into Revenge, you get a block token on your turn. You get plus 20 dot res and move res. When you press the button, when you press Withstand, you lose strength tokens and vulns. And then it gets rid of Revenge if you happen to be in the Revenge stance. And then for the rest of the battle that you're in Withstand, you can't gain strength, and you have a minus 100% crit. So it does not stack, meaning, if you press Withstand twice, it's not going to do anything. So imagine that like a stance. So you press Withstand, you are now in a stance where you get a block token on turn start, you get 20% burn res, or dot res, and then move res, and you can't gain strength, and it's minus 100% crit. The only difference. So you can press Withstand, and then you can press Solemnity, or you can press Withstand and then Chop, or I should say Withstand Plus. So that's only the mastered version. The unmastered still ends your turn, but the mastered version does not. So when we get into free actions, basically we're talking about Withstand, and we're talking about Revenge, essentially. So it's a little more, basically Withstand and Revenge are, I mean, you know, they were kind of like stances before, although they didn't give you permanent stats. They gave you some stuff to deal with for the next like 3 turns. It's really, this just adds an extra length basically to that. Instead of being 3 turns, it can be less if you wanted to, or it can be more if you wanted to. So essentially it's a button that you can press and get stats for the rest of the battle. Solemnity is still the same. Reflection, a little bit different. So Reflection, it does have a cooldown now, both mastered and unmastered. Mastered, it gives you plus 10 debuff res per token type removed. Into Revenge. So Revenge, same idea. Again, it is a stance ability. So the first, when you press it immediately, right as you press Revenge, gives you a strength token. And then you have a 75% chance of getting a strength token for the rest of the battle, or as long as you're in Revenge. alongside getting +3 speed, and then the other removing and cannot gain stuff that it does. So realistically, it's probably you're kind of just specializing him in, I guess, in sort of a way that, like, you know, if with old Leper, if you wanted tank, you went Poet, and if you wanted damage, you went Tempest. But now you can do that, like, within a path, within Wander, within a battle if you wanted to. I would probably argue personally, just run one stance. I would say just pick one of the two. There is some argument to maybe switch within a battle, but keep in mind that would be 2 of your 5 skills into a stance ability that just kind of gives some stats. You know, if that doesn't sound too scary to you, that's okay, but it makes him a little, I guess, one-dimensional in my opinion. I would say probably just pick one of the two personally, but it's totally up to you. With the exception being, like, maybe a really long fight, maybe a really long boss fight, you would want to have aspects where you're offensive and aspects that you're defensive, but I think it's probably better to take the resistances and the things that this give and just kind of sit on it. So Intimidate, they kept the 2 taunts and 2 weaks aspect, which is definitely surprising considering they've sort of been phasing taunt, tanks, and weak tokens sort of out in the kit. But they did give it a cooldown. It does take a little bit of getting used to have Intimidate have a cooldown and not be kind of a spammable ability. Keep in mind, it did get the damage buffs also, so for what it's worth. Still think it's a really strong ability, you just kind of can't spam it in the same way. Okay, Ruin is kind of weird, okay? If you don't understand this, I think I explained it kind of well in my guide. So if you want to see it, that might be a better way to do it. So Ruin, forget everything that's on the screen. Ruin fundamentally is still the same as it was before, which is the idea of you get damage per... basically every time you get hit, you get extra damage. It's just slightly different. It's kind of, it's confusing. It's a confusing ability when you first kind of get into it. But I think either me explaining it now or explaining it in my guide will make sense. Okay, so Ruin now has tokens. So again, it works basically the same, but it's now token based. So you have 2 sets of tokens. You have Ruination, and then you have Ruin Has Come or Ruin Has Come Plus. So, how it works is when you press Ruin, you get 2 of these Ruination tokens. So the Ruination tokens give you, depending on whether it's mastered or not, basically you're going to collect these Ruination tokens for the next 2 turns, and then after that 2 turns is over, either Ruin or Ruin Plus is going to convert them into damage. So you'll see when you press Ruin, you immediately get 2 of those Ruination tokens, which means that you are going to do minimum either 30% damage or 40% damage minimum when this expires. Again, it's kind of confusing. So you'll get 2 of those immediately, and then for every time that he gets hit over the next 2 turns, he'll get an additional one. And then after those 2 turns, so think of it like kind of, I guess kind of a bit like More and More, where it's sort of it gives him an aspect of him where every time he gets hit, he gets an extra one of those tokens. And then when Ruin expires, meaning 2 turns after you press the button, so the 3rd turn essentially, you will be able to do a lot of damage, whether it be through Ruin or Ruin Has Come. So Ruin Has Come or Ruin Has Come Plus, sorry. So keep in mind that this says next hit, not so basically if you keep this if you happen to just chop and miss. So that was kind of frustrating of old Ruin, is you would get, I don't know, plus 90% damage, plus 180% at whatever it was, right? And then you just fucking miss, and that'd be the end of it, and you're like, all right. So this is for 1 hit, but it does actually have to hit. So again, kind of, it's the same sort of ability. You get 2 of these Ruination tokens immediately, you stack up the Ruination tokens, and it's 1 big hit. As opposed to Ruin was kind of ramping, you know, next hit next turn you would do 60% damage, other after that would do 100. This is for one real big hit. I hope that makes sense, and if not, I hope you understand why it's maybe a little tough to explain. I think when you play it out, it makes sense. Bash now mastered, gives 2 immobilizes both to him and the target. Thank God. This is something that I talked about when I talked about my wish list for Leper rework. That Love of God. He needed this because move resist, although move resist is a nice buff, keep in mind move resist does not check when his allies are getting pulled forward. So he could have infinite move resist, and whoever's in rank 2 has 0 and they get pulled forward. Leper's still kind of fucked. So this is a good way to counterplay for anybody that has maybe a little more understanding of the enemies that they're going against and the chance of them shuffling. This is a way to keep him in rank 1 and give you a little bit of basically you prepare for kind of the shuffling a little. Okay, so let's get into Tempest. So Tempest is still pretty much the same path. So I mentioned it with Carcass, where there's kind of like 2 styles of reworks, with one of the style being just an updated version basically of the new path, knowing kind of like what we know now about the game, and just how like things have changed kind of over the years, I guess, this game has been developed. Tempest is still pretty similar path. The only difference is instead of just getting free stat buffs, basically that old Tempest got, he now does extra damage to the enemies based on negative tokens that he has, and extra damage to himself based on negative tokens that he has. So for hitting the enemies on the abilities that do damage, that do interact with this, it's percentage based, and for himself it's flat damage. So for what it's worth, to give you a little bit of context or a little bit of reference, basically Flagellant, when you use Punish, hits himself for about 5, and Tempest does 2 damage to himself per negative token. So basically on average it's going to be the same or less damage to himself than Punish. So not something that you have to worry about a ton, but do be careful if he has 2 health or something, or if he has 0 health. Do be careful about that. But for the most part, I would say it's pretty negligible. It's just kind of sort of a way to balance him a little bit. So again, it's a little bit kind of like Maniac, where you want to play around negative tokens, but I think Tempest does a better job of being able to manifest those negative tokens for himself than maybe Maniac does. Maniac kind of has an issue, at least in my opinion, where sometimes you get caught with no negative tokens. You kind of don't know what to do with yourself. Tempest does have that a little bit, but it has a way for you to play around it, which I think is good. So going to the Chop right there. So Chop has the same damage. So you see it does plus 10% damage per negative token. And it also, when he uses the ability, 2 damage per negative token to a maximum of 10 damage. So again, something to think about with the self damage. But you're going to get a lot of extra damage. It's obviously worth giving him negative tokens. And Tempest has the additional bonus of ignoring weak tokens when you hit a combo target. So although combo was obviously very important with the old Tempest, I would argue it's even more important now, because obviously it makes it so you're able to hit, but you're able to use those negative tokens for percentage damage, as opposed to, so not only are you not doing less damage, but you're actually doing more damage. So combo, very, very important, I would say, for Tempest, although anybody that loved old Tempest is kind of used to that anyways. So just see it does 10% per 10% damage per negative token unmastered, and then mastered does 15% damage per negative token. Hue and Break get the same treatment. So you see Hue does the same thing. Hue, by the way, do not sleep on Hue. That's a lot of damage. Just because it gives you the aspect, or gives you the element of the percentage sort of exponential, I guess, extra damage that it can do. This does a lot of damage. I would argue that you probably should run Hue. I don't know if you did before. I typically didn't on Tempest, but my Tempest was a weird kind of half tanking, half not. When with Tempest in general, it's probably better off to just full send it and just try to do as much damage as you can. It also has a slightly different Revenge, so it's the same idea where it's kind of a stance ability. The main difference is that first line there. So again, when you press Revenge, you get a strength token. And then as long as you're in Revenge, you get a strength token, or convert 1 strength to crit when strength times 2. Okay, so what that means is if you have 2 strength tokens, and on his turn start, that 66% rolls, it will convert one of those strengths into a crit token, leaving you with 1 strength and 1 crit. So basically, long story short, anytime that he has 2 strength tokens, there's a 66% chance that one of those strength tokens will turn into a crit. So this does a really good job. I think anybody that enjoys Tempest before, I would think would like it more now, based on the fact that you can now crit. Well, you know what that means? That means you don't low roll anymore. So that whatever 2 to 900 or whatever the threshold was before, you can guarantee that you're not going to hit that 2 or a 3 or a 4. That's a really big, obviously with the damage aspect, but that's a really good quality of life thing to deal with the low end, which is the low end was always the problem, the thing you wanted to avoid with Tempest. The fact that you can avoid that relatively consistently, pretty crazy. So as you can imagine, any path that hands out strength tokens, whether that be through Vestal Consecration, Sergeant Retribution, Jester, handing out strength tokens, any trinkets that give them strength tokens, that is crazy. So you would love to take advantage of that as often as you could. Give him strength tokens if you can. If you really want to see the top end of this path, let him sit on 2 strength tokens for as long as you can, and just hope that you can get the 2 out of 3 of basically converting that. Maniac, or sorry, Ruin is like Maniac. It's like Lash's Gift. This is another ability that does not end your turn, so it's a free action. Basically, it allows you to steal the negative tokens of a adjacent ally, one adjacent ally, not both adjacent allies, and use that for extra damage. So this would be a good ability to run, especially if you're really leaning into the revenge aspect. So you would revenge, get one of those strength tokens, convert into a crit token, so you have a strength, a crit, and that's an ability, or that's a time when you would press Ruin if somebody has some negative tokens, and pull it to him just to get that extra damage. If somebody has 2 taunts, for example, Man-at-Arms, you use Retribution or whatever, so you have the strength token, you have the crit token, and then you use Ruin, and it pulls 2 more negative tokens to him. That's either plus 20% damage or plus 30% damage, which obviously skyrockets because of the strength token and the crit, right? So ton of damage that you can do relatively consistently if you build around it. You don't necessarily need to run Ruin if you don't want to, but it does make it so your big hits hit even harder. And then Break gets the same treatment that Q and Chop get, so it's an extra option if you want to run. So although this is not a path skill, Tempest is Bash is a must run on Tempest, in my opinion, because it's a guarantee. If you master it early, it's a guaranteed plus 20% damage on your next hit, and then plus another 10 damage on the next hit after that. So this is the main reason right here. This ability, it might as well be a path ability. This is the ability where I talked about. This is the difference between this and Maniac. Is Maniac cannot force negative tokens. If he needs to heal, he cannot force negative tokens onto an ally and then Lash's Gift that, so he can heal. He cannot do that, but Tempest can force himself to get some negative tokens. So if you want to play Tempest at its highest damage per hit, you're going to need to run a Bash. Keep in mind, I think Bash is just a good ability in general, because obviously it dazes and it combos the setup for himself. But more importantly, it makes it for that awkward situation, or it avoids the awkward situation where he gets pushed into rank 3 and is now useless. So although you have to sacrifice a turn every other turn or every couple of turns or whatever, in order to give yourself those negative tokens, I think it's absolutely worth it. You want at least one immobilize on him at any given time if you can. If not, you should be pressing Bash, in my opinion. You should master this almost earlier than Chop or Hew or whatever your damage ability is. In my opinion, I think it's that important. So what I would run is probably this. This is what I would run. For what it's worth, also, by the way, your brain, when you talked about negative tokens, your brain might have said, okay, awesome. Intimidate gives 2 taunt tokens. That's pretty cool. That's what I did, at least. But if you think about it, if you take that extra thought and think about it, those taunt tokens are going to be gone by the time he gets his next turn. So you might think, oh man, I should press Intimidate so that he gets he gets more damage. They're going to be used up. At least that's, maybe you didn't think that. Maybe you're smarter than I am. But the first thing I thought when I was learning this path was like, oh man, Intimidate. Intimidate's awesome. It gives him 2 negative tokens. Really, that's what you use that for Bash. If you would like, I think Solemnity is just such a good ability. If you really want to go aggressive with Tempest, you can take that out for Ruin and give that aspect. It's definitely one of those paths where You probably want to drop an Intimidate. You probably want to drop a Purge, something that has a little more utility, because you're going to get basically Bash. The purpose of Bash is to give yourself negative tokens for future high damage and to basically get rid of blind tokens if there's not a combo. So Bash is like your sort of filler ability, but I don't want to call it filler because it's a damn good ability. I would say heal every time that you have the opportunity. If there's 2 targets, heal, get that extra damage from the negative tokens that you have, whether it be through Ruin or Bash, or just in general, just Vulns or whatever. With all the stance abilities, you want to press them first. Master it kind of early if you think that's an important aspect. Depending on how quick you're trying to do damage, it's very, very good mastery, just because it doesn't end your turn. If you can build a comp where he gets strength tokens, a lot, because that converting to crit token, if you think 66% chance of getting a crit token and using it in the same turn, that's fucking insane. And you can use it, by the way. You can also use it for Solemnity. So if he is kind of low, get that crit token, use Solemnity. Obviously, it'll use that up. It'll use the crit token up. It's not like you'd save it for the next turn. But I think it's an underrated kind of use of it. The team comp that I chose for this actually has a name also. You can either go Man-at-Arms or Crusader here. Basically, they fill the same sort of niche. Tempest, you can either go Wanderer, Bulwark, Templar, whatever you want to go for this. And then Tempest, I would say Intermezzo or Virtuoso for this, because Battle Ballad handing out Battle Ballad if it's mastered on Virtuoso or Wanderer, I guess for that matter, it hands out 2 strength tokens. That is super, super strong. Obviously, because it allows him to play around the revenge crit token aspect to it. So I would say that you don't have to run Virtuoso or Intermezzo, but that's what I would say. And if he presses Bash before you move him, not going to go anywhere. Keeps him in rank 2, although he doesn't need to be in rank 2. It's a little better if you're going to run Ruin, because it gives you 2 allies potentially to take the negative tokens from. Maybe it doesn't make a huge difference. And then I would say Ritualist back here. So I would say Wanderer, Man-at-Arms, or Crusader, or Bulwark, Man-at-Arms, or Templar, Crusader, whatever path you want to go. I would say Virtuoso, Intermezzo, although you don't need to. And then I would say Ritualist here, because Ritualist is the path where you're most incentivized to run Weakening Curse. If you wanted to go Warlock or something like that and run Weakening Curse onto that, absolutely could. If you run Warlock, that gives you better backline damage. This team is a little light on backline damage for sure, but this is such a good team to set up for Tempest. This will let you see Tempest if you're playing around like the strength tokens aspect. This will let you see Tempest at its basically absolute strongest. So if that's how you want to go about it, very good. You can switch some people out. You know, if you want to go Flagellant here and go Scourge and give you some extra healing if you don't trust the Occultist, understandable too. But this would be a very good comp to run with Tempest, and it would let you feel basically just how the real high end of damage of it. All right, next up, let's talk about Poet. This might be one of the first times you've heard me say too much negative about something. I understand, because I typically, even if it's a change that I don't like in general, I tend to typically understand that, first of all, as somebody that has as many hours as I have, obviously I'm a minority. So unless something is like objectively bad or objectively dumb, I tend to understand that when I say things. So I might be like, oh, I'm not crazy about it, but it's okay, I understand. Which I do kind of understand with Poet, but I'm not crazy about Poet specifically. Long story short, and I'll get into after I show you the skills, but long story short, at least if you care about my particular opinion, I think it got more love as an offensive path than a tank path. And the reason, you'll see why I feel that way, but the reason why I feel like that's not a good decision is because Monarch is already damage, although it's a little tank too, and Tempest is damage. So Poet, although I know, as I've said before, I know that the big dumb kind of meat shield taunt tanks don't really exist in the way that they did before. I think Poet got too much love as an offensive path and not enough as a defensive path, and that kind of upsets me, because I like old Poet. I think it was cool, and I like Leper as a tank. So it disappoints me a little bit. I'll get into kind of what I mean. So I will say one thing I do really like about Poet is I thought for sure the He got 50% for the old path. He just got free 50% stun res, free 50% move res. They kept that basically on withstand. Except it's now 40% and 50%. That I really like because I actually think, although I knew that just path stat boosts were not going to stay around like they were with the old poet. I'm really glad that they incorporated it into his kit. So the closest thing that we have to that kind of taunt tank is Poet Withstand. So you see, as the same as Wanderer Withstand, it gets 2 blocks and 2 taunts right when you press the button, and then for the rest of the battle, or until you switch into Avenge or switch into Ruin, as we'll get into, he gets a block on turn start, and he gets a 75% chance of having getting a taunt token on turn start. So that's pretty nice. So it's a slightly different Withstand, but it's a little kind of like tip of the cap to the old poet that got those stat boosts. So Withstand did get some love. Withstand got some love. That's about it as far as tanks go. So now Solemnity is a little bit different. Solemnity used to be, I believe it was 50% heal unmastered, 75% mastered. 50 unmastered, 75 mastered. So that was nice to have just that like almost full heal. That was just so nice with Poet. I really liked that. It has as far as flat, it went from having a better than Wanderer flat heal to a worse than Wanderer flat heal. But it does give a regen. It does give him some regen, which we'll have some synergy with the rest of the path. So although I really did like the big heal, I wish they would have kept that. I wish Poet would have had a better heal. It doesn't now. I mean, better as in like just the flat healing. So Revenge. Revenge is still offensive kind of thing. It's just a sort of Poet's version of it. So as you see, when you press Revenge, 2 strength tokens, and then he gain on killing blow 2 regen. Kind of cool. I kind of like it. Again, kind of an offensive aspect. And the thing I really like is he gets this Thorn effect. So this Thorn's effect, that second line right there, apply to attacker when hit, combo, or vuln. I think that's kind of interesting. So you could run a scenario where you're running Revenge and use Intimidate. So you can use Intimidate to snipe kills, which would give 2 regen, and then also it has a chance of applying either a vulnerable or a combo, kind of similar to Survivor on Smokescreen. So I think that's a pretty cool aspect too. I kind of like that, even though it's an offensive sort of with the strength tokens, it's an offensive kind of idea. But then you have the Thorns effect of combo and vuln, and you have the gain regen on killing blow. Which I think is pretty cool. So let me talk about Break before I talk about Ruin. So Break, essentially the same ability, but mastered. Those very 2 lines there on the bottom left is it steals all blocks, which I think is a pretty interesting aspect of Poet. It steals all blocks, and then if you steal all the blocks when you have regen, it actually turns those blocks into regen. So one regen per block. So that's kind of cool. So why does Solemnity, Revenge, and Break all have regen elements to it? And it's because of Ruin. So Ruin is not a stance ability, but it does convert the stances. So think of it like you're trading whatever stance that you're in, whether it be Withstand or Revenge. You're trading one of those for the stats that I'm going to read here. So it's not a stance, but it does remove the stance. So it's kind of like converting. So when you press Ruin, it converts your blocks to strength, and it converts your regen to crit token. So keep in mind that this is any regen. If you have any regen, whether it's 1 regen or it's 100 regen, it converts to a crit token. It's not like you're going to get, if you have 7 regen, you're not going to get 7 crit tokens, right? So here's why I'm not crazy about Poet. Crit tokens, obviously, are better than strength tokens. And so even if you go defensive, or if you want to play around Ruin where you go Withstand and then you press Ruin to turn those. This is not a free action, by the way. That's another thing. This seems like along the lines of the other free action abilities, but this is not a free action. This does end your turn. So like Withstand, and then you press Ruin, and it gives you a strength token. Fucking cares? Like it's a strength token. It's cool, but like you're not going to be like, oh man, I got a strength token. I can't wait till Leper's turn. But the regen to crit token is crazy. So first of all, tank, if you wanted to go Withstand into Ruin, it's the worst of the two things that it does. Although you can, you know, this is regen from any. It doesn't have to be regen just from him. So obviously Vestal is good. Any trinket or whatever that gives regen. This isn't. It's not like it's only for offensive poet, but you can get both. You know, if he has a block token, if you're playing around Revenge or playing around Withstand rather, he gets a block token from Withstand and then a regen from Vestal, something, right? So you can get both. But Solemnity, again, Solemnity gives you regen, Revenge gives you regen on kill, and Break can give you regen when you have Revenge. So you have a lot of synergy, a lot of ways to get that really cool crit token, but Tank Poet just kind of falls by the wayside. So that's my opinion. I'll tell you why I believe that that is an objective problem though, is because in my experience, obviously opinions differ, but in my experience, Poet does less damage than Tempest for more setup, because you have to get regen, whether it be yourself or through somebody else. You have to get regen. You have to press ruin in order to lose your stance, and then you have to wait until the next turn in order to do that. Versus Tempest, you have like, you can bash to give yourself negative tokens, which gives you damage. You can ruin, which is a free action to pull in one of the allies' negative tokens to him and do more damage like that. And because of the strength token, the 2 strength has the chance of converting that 3rd strength token into a crit token, or switching or whatever. Basically, if you get it, whatever it is, but however you want to word it, it's much less work than Poet. So, and it's not as powerful as Tempest, and it's not as powerful as Monarch. So, who's playing Poet? If you really like the crit tokens, cool, but it's easier to get crit tokens, or it's quicker to immediately get crit tokens and then use, like, the path, the time between getting the crit token and using it on Tempest is you get it and you immediately use it. But as opposed to this, you have to get regen, and then you have to press ruin, and then you have to wait until your next ability to do it, and then it doesn't even end up doing as much damage as Tempest. So it doesn't do the damage of Tempest. It doesn't really get shit, honestly, for a tank. So what surface or what purpose does Poet fill? A slightly different Wanderer, but even then, like, is it even that great? I don't know. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of this Poet. I don't know why it got the offensive love that it did. You know, if you want to compare Poet to Carcass, which I think there's some ways to compare the two. Carcass at least got extra ways, like toe-to-toe gives Winded now, right? It gives her taunt. It's still, although Howling End does damage now and gives an offensive aspect, you still have the tank utility aspect with Carcass, where you can either hand out the Winded tokens to the enemies, or you can just sit on them and play it like old Carcass. So how does Poet now compared to old Poet? It's got more damage, but it's got a cooldown of it's got a cooldown on Intimidate. It's got a less of a big heal on Solemnity. So like what the fuck does Poet do? A defensive role, stalwart and unyielding? How? I like the ideas. I like that the gain regen on killing blow is cool. Getting combo and vuln on hit is cool. Converting regen to crit is cool. But like, I'm not complaining that they added this. I'm complaining that the defensive aspect or the tank aspect of Poet basically didn't get shit. I mean, it kept the stats, which is super, super cool. Love that it kept the stats. The 40 stun and 40 move. Fucking love it. But like, what else does it have? It kind of just got thrown by the wayside, and I liked old Poet. And like, I understand that, you know, paths are more popular when they have an offensive aspect to it, but this, not a fan. If Intimidate would have had the old, if it would have been a spammable ability like old, I would have liked it. The first aspect of Carcass did not have Howling End converting block to block plus. And what I said is I think Ruin should, instead of converting block to strength. Have convert block to block plus. Like, who fucking cares about block to strength? And then they ended up giving that. That was my idea. And then they ended up giving that to Carcass, which is cool because that's some love for the tank aspect of Carcass. What the fuck's Poet doing here? Poet don't get nothing. Poet doesn't get anything. It's just, tank-wise, it's just a nerfed version of what it was, essentially. It does do more damage, which is kind of cool. But I don't know, man. I personally, you know, if you disagree with me, that's totally cool. It's understandable. Personally, not a fan of Poet. I don't like the direction, and I don't like the execution. I would have been fine again if, like, if it would have divulged into a very clear, you play this if you want offensive, you run these abilities, if you want to run defensive, would have been cool. Just kind of doesn't really get that. You know, if you do want to run Poet, if you want to try out Poet, my team comp is Poet. This would be Aspirant Occultist, and then Banner Crusader, and then Vestal, whatever. Who cares? As long as you run Divine Comfort and you give him regen so he can convert it, that would be the way to do it. This is a really, really solid... This is one of my favorite duos in the game right here. Holy Lance, and then the reason he's Aspirant is because Binding Shadows. Holy Lance, Binding Shadows. Keep doing that. Very, very solid team comp. Has as much stress heal as you would like. As much healing as you would like. And it allows you to give regen, which allows you to use Ruin and basically kind of convert that. If you're going to be running... If you are going to be doing that, you're probably running something like this. If you want to do the, you know, you get Revenge as early as possible, and then you can press Ruin basically whenever you want to crit, because you're going to have the regen either from his kills or from Vestal. Actually, maybe you probably want to run Intimidate, Intimidate, because it gives you the rank, the Omni rank ability of being able to snipe things. You could run Bash if you wanted to. If you're really going for the killing blow kind of aspect to this, and then Intimidate with the taunts works a little better to the apply to attacker when hit, because it forces basically abilities to potentially get that combo or the vuln. That's probably how I would play, you know, new Poet, damage Poet, whatever you want to call it. If you're playing old, if you want to play old, the old style of Poet, it's probably this. Gives you a little bit of utility with Purge. But unfortunately, this, you know, defensive, this ends up just being a nerfed version of the old Poet. So if you're a big fan of old Poet, I mean, if you're okay playing a slightly nerfed version, or a less, I don't know if nerfed is the right word, but less synergy. You have a worse Solemnity, and then you have Intimidate with a cooldown. If you're okay playing that, he still does that pretty decently, but I think this is a much bigger drop-off from old Poet to new Poet than old Carcass to new Carcass. I don't anticipate them going back and really doing anything else for this path, but I am very much disappointed with the tank aspect of Poet and kind of what they ended up doing with it. Maybe you'll play it, maybe you'll love it. I hope you do. Not crazy about it personally. Okay, so let's get into Monarch. I fucking love Monarch, and I'm gonna tell you why. I like the idea of old Monarch. I like the idea in this game of a long or a late game hero / like a boss slayer, which was the intent of old Monarch, but obviously it missed the mark on that. Monarch got outdated pretty quickly when first of all, they made it so you could change paths at ends, which it wasn't there when the game first came out. So that just made it so you don't ever have to deal with the downsides of Monarch. You would just switch it at the last end and only fight Cosmic. And obviously with Kingdoms coming out, Monarch made no sense. So at the time it came out, it made at least some sense, although it still wasn't great. I love the idea of it, and honestly, I did not think that they would keep a similar idea, because it's really hard to balance. So, long story short, Monarch, basically you get, every time you get a kill, you get a stack essentially, and then the abilities do more based on those stacks. So I thought for sure that this stacking idea of Monarch wouldn't stay, just based on the fact that it's very hard to balance. It's tough to make it not absolute trash early game, but not so game-breakingly strong late game. And also between Kingdoms and Confessions, because Kingdoms is way longer. How do you make it so that he's not garbage in Confessions or way busted in Kingdoms. And I think they did a fantastic job of that. And I want to say, you know, props to Red Hook, because this is not an easy path to make or balance, because again, there's just you're balancing on a razor blade when it comes to a path like this, to not be so unfun early game that nobody wants to play it, but not so game breakingly broken late game that it just is just dumb. So they kept Monarch as a stacking idea. It works in Confessions and Kingdoms, believe it or not. Kingdoms, I think it's a little bit better just based on the chance that you get, or based on the fact that you get longer at that top end of that damage. You get longer because just Kingdoms is obviously longer in general. So, but I do think this is a worthy pick in Confessions also. And I think you'll definitely feel the power of the stack. So let's go over the passive. Gain on Killing Blow plus 1% Monarch's Oath. Permanently to a maximum plus 66%. Killing a boss grants plus 3%. Killing a lair boss grants plus 6%. So boss meaning like, you know, Kyrgen, for example, is one of those. One weird thing about Monarch is that affected skills is move. So only on Monarch he can move forward to, like manually move forward to, and manually move back to. But only on Monarch. It's a little weird, but it is kind of nice. So keep this. Your bread and butter of the path is going to be how quickly you can stack this. So keep this in mind as I go through the abilities. Keep this stacking mechanic in mind and exactly how you're going to do it. So if you look at Chop is exactly pretty much what you expect it is. Base damage, it's a little bit of a nerfed, but it does deal bonus damage equal to Monarch's Oath. If you are, meaning it can be anywhere from, you know, 0% to plus 66%. If you are curious of the numbers, I have those numbers in the guide under each one of these abilities, as far as, you know, 33% ends up being, what, 7 to 12, I believe. You know, giving some rounding, or mastered, that would be 9 to 18. So it gives you some, at half stacks, that's what it would be. If you're really curious in those numbers, I did the calculations. As you can imagine, this is a little hard to test because it's hard to get 50%. It's not quick to get 50% and then check it. So numbers might be slightly off, but if they are in the guide, they're kind of in the patch notes also, at least for they had some kind of like checkpoints in there. Urge is a completely different ability. So first of all, it's usable from rank 1 and rank 2, and hits rank 1 and rank 2. So that's number 1. So this is basically a way to kill dodge tokens. So it ignores dodge tokens. It has a 1% chance of stealing all the positive tokens. It removes 2 positive tokens, and it still clears the corpse. So keep in mind, it does still clear the corpse. It doesn't push back like all the other purges, but it does still clear the corpse. So it is in a completely different ability. And then the steal chance for unmastered is equal to half of what your Monarch's Oath is. And then mastered, it's equaled your Monarch's Oath. So that means full stacked purge, full stacked mastered purge, 67% chance of stealing negative tokens. That's pretty crazy. And for what it's worth, I guess I should mention. So for what it's worth, in my experience, obviously you are incentivized to stall out rounds and to do things like that in order to get Leper every kill. I don't think you have to do that to get them relatively quickly. In my experience, and I've only really tested it with Kingdoms. I tested a little bit with Confessions, but mostly in Kingdoms. You can get this pretty consistently in like 6 to 10 days. So keep in mind, over a 40, 45, 50 day campaign, that's a lot of days with full maxed Monarch. So that, I would say, would be the average pace that you're going to. And I'm not somebody that's super patient, that's willing to do things like just pass turns and wait for Leper to get every single kill. If you let him get... if you go for 11% a day, that would basically, if you did 3 fights of 4 heroes each, that'd be 12. And if you got 11 in that day, 11 kills with him, that would be most but not all. And that's like, towards the quicker end kind of stacking. So that would give you 6 days. 10 days would be, 6 kills per, which is per day in Kingdoms, which isn't too bad. In my experience, I would say 6 to 10 days in Kingdoms, give or take. How willing you're, how out of your way you're willing to go to like fight things and make sure he gets every single kill. I don't think you have to play like that. I still think it happens really quickly. And then in Confessions, I would say near the end of your second region. Again, it depends a lot on how many fights you're doing. If you go against a lot of size 2s, whether that second region you go to is like Sluice or Catacombs, obviously being a little bit shorter. But I would say roughly that's a pretty good way of going about it, about the end of the second region. So that still gives you, you know, half the run, if not more, depending on how underground you decide to go. Gives you about half the run with full stacked Monarch. So as you can see, 6 to 10 days in Kingdoms, about 2 end of the second region in Confessions. That's still, you still get a good time of kind of like sit on the fruits of your labor, if you will. You still get some pretty good time. So I think that's pretty good. Solemnity, pretty simple. It gets an extra percentage. Again, that's in the, they do have a little bit of a mention in the patch notes. And also I have in my guide the exact numbers if you're curious on the exact numbers, but basically just a higher scaling version of Solemnity. Talk about Reflection. Reflection is essentially the same, but a tiny bit different. If you get happen to get some positive tokens on a Monarch, you can copy those positive tokens to an adjacent ally. Pretty nice. But it still gives you the, basically just it's kind of a buff to a Reflection, sort of. Obviously, you don't get the, it has a slightly longer cooldown unmastered, and then obviously you don't get the debuff resist for getting rid of tokens, but copying positive tokens can be pretty nice. You know, you think of a situation like Instructus. If you hand him a crit token, he can copy it to somebody else. Something like Jester, Battle Ballad, things like that. It's an ability that you can choose to run or you can choose not to. Totally up to you. Okay. Monarch Ruin is weird. Like normal Ruin, it's weird. So as you can see, it uses the same Ruin has come token. But Ruin has come, honestly, I kind of just wish they would have come up with a different token for this. I think this is a little confusing. Ruin has come does something completely different on Monarch. So, in order to see that, you have to basically click on Monarch and then look at the token glossary. So it's not super clear that that's what it is. But what it does is it basically non-chop skills gain damage bonus equal to Monarch's Oath. So if you're at full stacks, 66%. This essentially is Hew, Break, Bash, Intimidate. So if you would decide to do that, if you master it, then Monarch Ruin has come, gives you Execution 1, and it gives you 1 stress per hit. So if you do use Hew, a little bit of a downside, but there is at least a way for you to buff Hew if you want to do the Hew spam kind of thing. Admittedly, it is a little confusing that it uses the same token but has a different thing than normal Ruin. Just takes a minute to get used to. And then Ruin Plus gives plus percentage damage to both adjacent allies equal to half of Monarch's Oath. So what you can do, and what I would, so this is what I would recommend. I'll show you. I guess I'll show you the other abilities. What I would recommend, you get the idea. What I would recommend actually, and I think I was talking about on Tempest how Bash is kind of the most important part of the path. The most important thing of this path is Intimidate, because it allows you to hit every rank, and that's fucking it. That's all it needs to do, is it allows you to snipe kills. And that's what you really should be doing with Monarch. You don't, you know, if a dot accidentally takes a kill of some other enemy, you don't need to Alt F4 and start a new run. But you do want to use Intimidate to snipe kills, essentially. So what my suggestion basically is pick a number that you're happy with as far as Monarch's Oath. Let's say 50%. So use Intimidate, put him in rank 1. Let's say get to 50% stacks, and then actually move him into rank 2 and give him Ruin instead. And then master it as soon as you can, because it gives him damage. It would say, if it was 50%, let's say, it would give him 25% damage to each of his allies. That's pretty cool. You don't have to do that, but that is pretty cool. But definitely early game, put him in rank 1. Put him in rank 1, run Intimidate to be able to snipe as many kills as you can. And the last change with Monarch is Bash, but it's not really much of a difference. The only difference is it gives you the ability to stun into combo. That's it. Just a slight little, I'm okay with this. You know, I'm sure this is something that came up in kind of like the development of like, oh, should we put this on any path? And they just kind of threw it on Monarch. If you want to use it, cool. If not, doesn't make a difference. I kind of like that change. Just a tiny little change, but honestly, I think that's totally okay. So if you are going to run Monarch, what I would run is, let's say this is what I would run early. The reason Revenge is because strength tokens, obviously very good to snipe kills. Speed tokens, very nice snipe kills. And again, pick a number, you know, let's say it's whatever, 40%, 50%, whenever you hit that many stacks, I would say move him to rank 2 and then run Ruin instead of Intimidate and Master Ruin. Because this handing out adjacent handing out damage to adjacent allies, sorry, is pretty good. Although you're not getting much value if you play like this, you're not getting much value out of the extra damage. Like Purge would get you know, percentage damage, not a big deal. Whatever. You know, you could run, if you really don't want to run Purge, you could run Hew instead, or you could take Revenge off, although Revenge is a really, really good stat boost, so I'm not sure I would do that. But I would say my recommendation would be rank 1, do this for early game. Once you get enough stacks, whatever that number is that you hit, let's say it's 50%, switch to Ruin, master it, and then give damage to adjacent allies. It's a lot of fun. This is kind of, I sort of said it with Ravager, and it's kind of the same with Monarch, where you know whether this is a path or not for you. If you like the idea of stacking, and you like the idea of getting kills, I think you'll really enjoy this path. If you don't, if you're like, it seems too tedious, and you just don't need to run it, and that's okay. Tempest will give you similar damage, but obviously it won't have the healing aspect to it. But Monarch is kind of like a best of both worlds. Like, you'll definitely, when you get full stacks, you'll definitely feel it. It is worth your labor to play the end of Monarch if you decide to. If it's not worth your time, totally okay, totally understandable. But I do think it's worth it, especially in Kingdoms. It gives you an extra little mini game to do just to kind of get some kills if you like to do that. Monarch does not keep his, my understanding, I believe, is Monarch does not keep his Monarch's Oath stacks with memories. So you can't just sit on that and farm it forever. The team comp that I said for this is Monarch, whatever Flagellant path that you want, Alchemist, and then Sharp Shot. A lot of damage. First of all, a lot of damage. You know, Scourge would probably be the good option there. But it's a lot of damage. There's a lot of damage, especially with Alchemist and Sharp Shot, which allow you to hopefully get close to killing, and then allows Intimidate to kind of snipe. There is a little bit of potential that, you know, the Bleed or the Blight from Alchemist or the Blight from Flagellant can take a kill. As long as you're kind of paying attention with how you're using these abilities, I don't think it ends up being happening too often. And even if it does, like I said, you can still stack it pretty quickly. It doesn't make a huge difference if you're playing Kingdoms, whether you get it, you know, on day 6 or day 10. It's still pretty early. If it's Confessions, doesn't matter whether you get it at the end of the 2nd region or early into the 3rd region. It still ends up being, you know, I don't think you really have to min-max it too much. For what it's worth, although it's difficult to do, keep in mind this gain on killing blow that you get from the path counts for dots also. So obviously, Leper does not have any dots in his kit, but if you can get like Spiked Skullcap from Iogen, that any enemy that hits him gets a 1 bleed, that could be all it takes for you to snipe a kill. Combat items. If you see, if something like Sharp Shot, which does straight damage and no dot, if it gets a couple of enemies, if you can like Grape Shot Blast, get a couple of enemies to like 2 or 3 health left, something like, you know, one of the AoE burn items, AoE blight items, AoE bleed items, and snipe those kills kind of sort of passively. So that is a nice thing kind of to look out for. Corrupted Bile Gland, which is the ability that, or it comes from Thought Experiment. It's the trinket that comes from Thought Experiment. It does 3 dot on hit, but it also, he takes 3 dot on hit. You can find a way to get some dot added to his abilities, a little bit of extra oomph to his abilities. That could be a really, really nice way to like intimidate, and that makes it so if intimidate low rolls or something, then you can get the kills with the combat items, or you can get the kill with, you know, Corrupted Bile Gland or whatever, and that counts for that. That can, although that's kind of relatively niche, that can go a long way, especially to get your stacks kind of going. I think Monarch is a lot of fun. Like I said, it's very, you'll feel it as far as the stacking goes. It'll feel worth it at the end, at least in my opinion. Good path. Leper in general. Let's say the reworks in general. Hellion in general. Hellion I like a lot. Ravager is definitely, Ravager I would say is probably a little close to the end, that the overpowered kind of end of it, just because you do have so much control over Ravager that it's, I don't know if it's as scary as it might seem, but that's okay. That's just my opinion. My opinion, it is what it is. I do like that there is, if you want to play it like old Ravager, or if you want to play it really kind of like Wanderer adjacent that heals, I think it's really, really strong for that also. Berserker, simple path, but I think it's a great example of sometimes you don't have to change a lot of abilities in order to make an interesting path. Again, it only has 4 path skills, which considering how creative Red Hook has been nowadays, it doesn't even have that many, other than Howling End, it really doesn't change a lot either. So, especially with how creative they are, they've come up with completely new abilities. Berserker doesn't really need it. I think sometimes simplicity is perfectly okay, if not better than maybe super intricate stuff. Love it. Carcass, exactly what I would hope for. Basically a 2025 update of Carcass. Surprising that they added such a strong damage ability with Howling End. Again, I really, really wish that this convert block to block plus would have happened on Ruin on Poet personally, but that's okay. I still think it's really, really strong on Carcass. Crazy. One of the sleeper best paths in the game, probably still one of the sleeper best paths in the game. Although maybe it doesn't, you know, super face tank maybe as it did before. Leper. I like Leper also. At least I should say I like Tempest and Monarch. I'm a bit sad that there's been so much discourse. And again, if you don't follow what other people in the community think, that's totally okay. It's probably better for your own goddamn health. But I think it's a shame that so much discussion has been around about the free actions, or it's people are kind of bringing up the same statements over and over. I think everything about the free actions is kind of already been said, as far as maybe them making overloaded abilities and things like that. Totally safe argument. I've just seen a lot of discourse about it, but Tempest, also exactly what I hoped for. I think it's a more consistent, less frustrating version of the old Tempest, which gives you more control to get the fun part of Tempest, meaning you can get negative tokens with Bash, and then you can get the crit tokens with Revenge. I think they did a fantastic job with Tempest, keeping the identity of the path and raising the floor of damage, meaning like the really frustrating where you have a 5 to 12 and you do 5. It's still gonna happen. It's still Leper, but it did feel a little bit mean sometimes because that was kind of Tempest's whole purpose. Not exactly its whole purpose nowadays, although kind of. I think they did a fantastic job with that. Poet, you know, as I said, I really don't like the direction of Poet. I don't think it's good. I don't think the direction is good, and I don't think there's much of a reason to play Poet. It's just, it doesn't do the damage of Tempest. It doesn't do the tank or the damage of Monarch. I think it's just like a weird in between. Between Wanderer. Is what it is. Glad that they kept the stat boost though. That's just my opinion. You know, if you disagree with me, that's totally okay. I would love to hear the argument. And Monarch, fucking love Monarch. Super glad that they kept the stacking aspect of Monarch. And that they did it in a way that feels within the range of the game, meaning like it's not stupid broken and it's not one-shotting things. It's not one-shotting everything, at least when you get full stacks. And again, I applause because I don't think this was... I think this would have been a very easy to path to mess up. Or like I said, it's dead weight early game and or it's just too strong late game, and I think they did a really, really, really good job at that. I hope you enjoyed my talking. If it did help you learn these paths, please let me know. If you have any input, any questions, if you have specific questions about what team comp would I run with this, please let me know. The nice thing about being a smaller channel is I can see comments and I can respond to them. Any input that you have, I would appreciate it. Like and subscribe and everything. Stop by my Twitch stream and say, hey, I watched your Hellion Leper video, I loved it, or I fucking hated it, you're an idiot, I love Poet. I'm alright with that too. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a very nice rest of your day. Say hi. I would appreciate it. Have a nice rest of your day. More content to come in the future, of course. Bye.